and since October 2018, the rector of IIUM. And I suppose it must be an equal challenge to him coming to IIUM to take the university to its next phase, as he keeps mentioning in his presentations. He has been widely recognized internationally, International Association of Universities, World Health Organization, UNESCO. He has received fellowships from Academy of Science Malaysia, World Academy of Arts and Science, and even the International Council of Islamic Finance Educators. I think we also had Tan Sri as our, if I'm not mistaken, honorary advisor a few years ago. And he has received numerous honorary doctorates. Now, what makes Tan Sri a little bit special, and maybe this is something that I'd like to share with everyone. He is the son of the late almarhum Cikgu Abdul RAZAK Abdul Hamid, the sole survivor of the Hiroshima bombing in 1945 in Japan. And I think that has got something to do with his determination to talk about excellence and perseverance, social issues, and this whole area of sustainability. Maybe Tan Sri can share it later during his presentation, but I think that has had a major impact on his views. And when you look at his involvement, not only as the Vice Chancellor of USM, he has been involved with the Consumer Association of Penang on issues related to environmental issues. And right up to now in IIUM, he's pushing this idea of sejahtera as a sustainable concept. Yeah, and the second point is he's a man who always is out of the box. He's not within the box. He's an out of the box thinker with ideas that are usually pushing you to your limits. And I think this is a quality that we all admire in Tan Sri. And for that purpose, he is going to be talking to us this morning. With the permission of the organizers, we may take a little bit more time. We have 10:30, unless Tan Sri has to go somewhere, but we could maybe push it a little bit more to 10:40 or even 10:45, depending on questions. Tan Sri, you have the floor to speak as long as you want, but we have to end probably 10:40, 10:45 the latest. So question time will be up to you. I now have the pleasure to invite Tan Sri Zul to make his presentation on building and developing and sustaining excellent Islamic universities in the Muslim world. Tan Sri, the session is yours.
Thank you very much, Brother Aslam. Your generous introduction makes me even more nervous in trying to say what I want to say. But anyway, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Let me acknowledge Professor Jamil, Brother Farid, Brother Fauzan, and also the moderator Shahran, and certainly Professor Kamal, Excellencies, brothers and sisters. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam syafil anbiya mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. When I was asked to talk about this, I kind of willingly agree, because I thought it's a kind of original thing, a workshop that was mentioned earlier. But now that I'm faced with people around the world, it makes me kind of jittery. But nevertheless, given the topic, which is very close to my heart, as mentioned by Aslam, there's something that I've been grappling with for many years now. You are forcing me to kind of concentrate into what needs to be said and what needs to be thought of in this particular context. Yeah? So creating a world-class university in the Muslim countries community, I will give you just an overview, because I think there's a lot more specialist speakers talking about finance, talking about HR, talking about, many of the small subsection, which I will leave it to them. But I would like to craft a kind of a big picture when we talk about a world-class university, particularly in Muslim countries. What are we trying to tell, or what are we trying to arrive at? Yeah, and this basically is very much of my own sort of thinking. I will not represent IIUM as such, but certainly there are many examples in IIUM that could be used, and I'll try to illustrate this. Yeah. As you can see, the logo IIUM, and there are two other logos beside it, which I will explain later. And this is part of the development that ASLAM was talking about. How do you move into an area that has not been moved by many other universities in the Islamic world as such, right? Now, when we talk about world class, the question I always ask is whose world? When I came vice chancellor in USM, I was told that there is only one world, and the world is the Western world. And you need to follow everything that they do, and therefore you need to kind of play the catch-up game. There's no way that you can create your own university. The word creating does not apply. You just want to follow. And people always say, do you know this? Many of the university in the part of the first world that you need to follow and you should study them. Yeah. But if you think about world, there are many worlds, and this is a world that is based on gold reserve. You can see, so many countries, and I would never know that France has got a lot more gold reserve than UK. And Italy, I thought it's a poor country, is as big as France. So when you talk about the world, whose world are we talking about? And certainly in our part of the world, when you talk about gold reserves, we do not shine at all. And therefore, if you play the context of gold reserves, we are nowhere to be seen, right? But on the contrast, if you take the other dimension about sanitation, you find that our world shines everywhere. You have India, you have Sudan, you have Nigeria, you have Indonesia, you have Philippines, you have Pakistan, and of course you have Malaysia, is not mentioned. You have Bangladesh, you see. So it depends again on whose world and what is it that you are talking about. So it is not easy to talk about world class until you know what the context is all about, right? And so what is world class? In a many conventional way, it talks about rank of the world best. Yeah, it could be a world-class orchestra, a world-best economy, world-best facilities. It could be a way of attracting people to your place because you are the world best. It could be a player, it could be a performer, it could be millionaires. Like Singapore is trying to collect as many millionaires as possible. But ranking, top graduates, celebrities, companies, NGO, like your IIIT, could be one of those. But last but not least is all the question of reputation. Never university is interested in reputation until very recently, which I will try and recount. Yeah? So we have words like a top rate, a premier universities, excellent universities, outstanding, exceptional, world first, A1, and all these things are kind of characteristics of what quote unquote a world-class university is all about. Whether they are really world-class is another question altogether. Yeah. So everybody wants to be world class, but I think the context is different. All this while we've been talking about content, and therefore contents from some other part of the world or some other university. But now I think it is not the question of content, it's a question of context. And therefore I do welcome when we talk about Muslim communities and Muslim countries. This is the context that we need to focus on. Whether it's world class to other people, it is not our business, neither do I care. But it is within our context. We are world-class because we contribute to the development of the university, to the values of the university, and to the meaning of the university as far as Ummah is concerned, right? So I want to look at the context. And if this is the context you look at now, one of the contexts, if you talk about COVID-19, you find that there is not many. So the so-called world-class university is shine in this particular context of COVID-19, right? If they are there, they are not world-class the way we understand it. It's a first, second, third. Many other countries like India, like Peru, Brazil, in this particular context. But this is the context that we probably do not want because the COVID environment is not a good context as far as we're concerned, as far as the number of deaths and the number of cases. Yeah. There's another context which I am surprised when I went through and I see the world best place to retire. So suddenly I see Malaysia is number 5. And this comes from a credible source, the Asia News Network, yeah, and it's taken by a study done in Ireland. And you will see that the so-called developed countries are not the best place to retire, at least as far as this study is concerned. Yeah, there is no I see developed countries there. Most of these are developing countries. And this is what I meant by what is the context that we are talking about. So the context is very, very important, not just the content. All this while we've been talking about contents, and we forget about the context, and therefore we miss sort of the idea of what a world-class university is all about. Yeah. So how do you contextualize the world-class university? Everybody wants one. We talk about the world-class, everybody wants one, but very few knows about it. As I've just mentioned, what is the context? Yeah, how do you actually make this context work and relevant to the university and the people around the university, in the region around the university, if not the world? But worse, no one knows how to get there. All the so-called world-class university is something that they create to their own bias. So when you talk about the QS ranking, for example, these are the criteria that they make among themselves, and they agree. These are the 4 criteria that we need for a world-class university. All of us are not being consulted, and suddenly we are asked to play the game. And therefore, we are definitely struggling to play the game. For example, I'll give you a simple example. If a world-class university is about soccer, right? Not many countries play soccer. But then if you want to play the game, then you have to change. If my university play rugby, for example, I want to join the world-class university, I have to change my game plan from rugby to soccer. And this is, I think, where we are now when we talk about nobody knows how to get there until you are the one who write the rules. And this question, are we Muslim universities, Muslim country, writing the rules for our university, or are we just following somebody else's rule in the hope that we will recognize as a world-class university per se, right? So going from there, I want to just emphasize that the context matter. Context matter means you need to know what is the overall picture you're talking about. In other words, who are your competitors? What are the other relevant points that you need to look at, especially when you are trying to understand the building blocks of the past. In the case of Islam, I think we have done tremendously well in the past, and meaning to say that there is a context, there is a successful story, but how can you rebuild this and rebuild it better so that the future university will be laid on a very strong foundation that we have already built. So we are not borrowing from somebody else. It comes from our tradition, our civilization, and our standing and values, which is part and parcel of our living styles and also our value system and worldview, as it were. Right? So I would want to take you into 4 contexts as far as this is concerned. University, to me, now becomes an evolutionary idea. It is not just one idea that fits all. It is not just one idea that we need to understand, but we can evolve it. We can make it work for us. And there are many of this, but there are 4 very major contexts that I can think of. One is, of course, the ancient universities, the days of the Greeks and the Roman, perhaps. Yeah. The next one is Islamic university. And I don't use the word university at this point in time. I call it centers of learning because the word universities wasn't fashionable at that particular time. The word university was just introduced later in the 11th century when the University of Bologna was set up in 1088 by the Europeans. This is when they introduced the word university. It is called universitas, from the Latin word universitas, and it has a special meaning. It has a special connotation. It has a very European-centric sort of meaning, not the way we understand it today. And therefore, we are caught in this Eurocentric idea of what the university is, which I will talk to you a little bit. Yeah. And now as this progresses, and I will tell you why it progresses, we now have, quote unquote, a modern university, which is global in nature. It is no longer situated in a particular country as we call a national university. University now needs to be global, mean beyond international. International alone is not enough. You need to be global. In other words, you understand and encapsulate all the issues that is confronting mankind, confronting humanity, if you really want to be a global university as such. Yeah? So these are the 4 contexts that I want to go through very quickly because time is not on my side. But let me understand, first of all, in the pre-7th century, why I use the pre-7th century? Because the post-7th century is where the Islamic culture, civilization takes hold in Europe, right? At that particular point, we look at this kind of a structure. There is an Academy of Athens, people like Socrates, people like Plato, people like Aristotle dominate the scene, okay? And their wisdom is know thyself, following the what we call the philosophy of the Greek, to the mind that is still the whole universe surrenders. In other words, we are not talking about just one region. We are talking about almost the whole universe as well. The kind of wisdom that they talk about is very large and very wide. I bring this because the way university anchor itself now is no longer about this kind of wisdom. We just talk about the rank number 1, number 2, and it's all about us. Doesn't matter what the universe is as far as that's concerned. We have moved on that point as far as the pre-industrial age is concerned. In India, in the 5th century, we have got the Nalanda University, and the Nalanda University is basically talking about a kind of a gift. What gift is this? To them, this is a spiritual gift. Yeah, and here you find that most of the people here are actually Buddhist monks, and these are universities which is spiritually engaged at that particular time in the 5th century, teaching spirituality to the Buddhist people who wants to take this on. And these are the models of that university at that particular point, before the word university becomes fashionable as it is today. It's got stuck now. Okay. The Gita talks about this. Yeah, it is better to live your own destiny imperfectly than to live an imitation of somebody else's life with perfection. I think we are caught in this now. We want to follow and imitate other countries, other universities around the world, not knowing that the contexts are different. One of the very major differences is about finance. Yeah, if you look at the United States later on, you will see how much money do they invest, and half of that money is our money. In other words, this comes from colonization, when they come to your country, to my country, and take all the richness back to their country, and they redevelop their university at our expense. And this comes very clearly now when we talk about, all Black Lives Matters and the things that we're seeing in the post-COVID environment, which I will tell you a little bit later. So even then, there are many discoveries. Yeah, in this part of the world, we talk about the numerals, and these numerals are the one that comes from our part of the world, the Arabic and the Indian civilization, where we invented zero. Yeah, at that particular time, there was no zero. You can see the Roman letterings there will not make them scientifically or educationally advanced because the zero is not there. And I want to bring this point: when we invented the zero, yeah, the Indian and the Arabic numerals, this zero was not copyrighted. Everybody uses this. But the moment you use the zero in a binary system to create a program, then suddenly that program is copyrighted. And I always argue with my European friend, when you use the zero from this part of the world, how much compensation you give? Or he says it's public domain, so we don't have to use it to pay anything. Yeah. But the moment they used it, they call it intellectual property, and therefore they begin to sort of charge and monopolize it. I want to underline this because this is a departure point as far as the industrial education is concerned compared to the post-industrial education. Education has been commoditized, has been made into a trade, and they sell and buy education so that they remain the gatekeeper of what education is all about. And this is, I think, the general departure that I want to distinguish in this talk today. All right. So let us move to the next context, which is the post 7th century. Like I say, why the post 7th century? Because this is where I think the Muslim begins to move into Europe, particularly the southern of Spain, then called Andalusia. Names like Cordoba, names like Toledo, names like Granada, names like Seville are not unusual to us, because this is where the sprouting of centers of learning as far as a Muslim is concerned. In fact, the real university at that particular time was this university that built many of the tradition that is now found in the West, that is now borrowed by the West, and sometimes it is owned by the West side. We started with a madrasa. right? In fact, the first university, the University of Karayin, that is in Fes, was a madrasa until it was turned into a university, taking a different dimension altogether, which we talked about. We have got our own brand of scholars. I like to quote Al-Kindi because he's a polymath. A polymath means he doesn't belong to any one discipline. We are very proud to know that we are a specialist in chromosome X. Yeah, and we do not know anything else about human being, only the chromosomes. But here is a guy who have got many disciplines. In fact, he has mastered 14 disciplines. And he can connect all these disciplines together. He can connect philosophy to mathematics, to medicine, to music, to whatever it is, because at that time, knowledge is still one. And there's that unity of knowledge that we talked about. When we talk about revealed knowledge and the combination with human science, it's about this convergence of knowledge. That has been practiced for a long time during that particular time. And Al-Kindi alone, at that point, talks about many things, and he has wrote 200 books. I want to repeat, it is during the 9th century, he has written about 200 books. No PhDs, but here's a guy who wrote 200 books, and some of the books are still living today. Yeah, he's able to synthesize and adapt and use knowledge of the past. They borrow from the Greeks. They are not shy to borrow from the Greeks, because if this is a knowledge that is useful, then they will borrow it. But they will also put the Islamic dimension to it, to enrich it, to embellish it, to make it better. I think this is the mindset. When Aslam talked about just a few things just now, this is the mindset that I think I want us to realize, that as far as Muslim university is concerned, it's just beyond the things that you can count. The money, the human resource, the facilities, it is just the makeup of the mind, which is different. And when the makeup of the mind is different, then everything else is organized differently. You may not even want to start with money. You want to start with something else, as we have seen, as far as this is concerned. So when you go back to the Andalusian tradition for almost 1,000 years, yeah, beginning with university in Andalusia, at the end of the day, I can see these are the characteristics of Muslim intellectual civilization. Call it whatever by whatever name. Yeah, they are a broad-based system. People are polymath. They are transdisciplinary. They know many, if not at least three disciplines, if not many. As all open access, no intellectual property, no patent rights, nothing. It is balanced, right, between spirituality and what is physical, between inside and outside, between the esoteric and the exoteric. Yeah, they are original thinkers. Many of them brought in new ideas into knowledge as far as science is concerned. They are scholars. They are not just academicians. They are not just lecturers. They're not just researchers. They are scholars in their own right. They're internationally recognized. They are sought after. People go to Andalusia. I know, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Pope went to Andalusia to learn from them before he became a Pope. I think Sylvester II, if I'm not mistaken. They write, they translate, they're very tolerant to knowledge. Yeah, they just don't say this is not Islamic and therefore get away. They try to synthesize, see what they can Islamize the way we want to do it today. And they're very courageous to do it. If it's wrong, they say it's wrong. If it's right, they will fight for it. They're mobile, they move. Yeah? We move now also, but they move in a different fashion. They're very mission-oriented, and they create their own institution. I think you know the Baitul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, which to me is a symbol of what an Islamic university ought to look like. Yeah, I think we know all about this, but let's see whether we can emulate this. Yeah, and when I was in Andalusia, this is a part of the Alhambra. All these things is crafted all over the world, right? And I was told when the Christian took over, they want to get rid of this, but it's too many. It is too many on the wall. If they get rid of this, they will actually just mar the whole building. So whether they like it or not, they leave it there. In other words, you must plant the seed everywhere so that it's not easy for people just to throw it out because the seed is sprouting everywhere. And this is a seed of the mind. If you don't have that, I think people will just throw us out very easily because we are not rooted at all as far as that's concerned. So this is a kind of idea that I think we need to talk about, think about. Are our system doing this? Is our system broad-based? Do we train polymath at the level that we could? Yeah. Are all our literatures open access, or do you still talk about, you need to pay for this, you need to pay for that as far as knowledge is concerned? Are we good writers? Can we write and influence people in terms of the world of knowledge as far as concerned? Are we courageous to fight what is wrong and what is not right as far as knowledge is concerned? Yeah. And what is the institution that we can create as far as that's concerned? This is one. I don't know how true is this, but this seems to be, at the peak of the caliphate, this is a kind of structure that we see. And it is, look at this, and I don't see any cities around the world is organized like this. And I was told the Baitul Hikmah is somewhere at the center, right? And they have got maps and got everything's well organized. So it's not just one building, but the whole infrastructure that goes along with it. It is very integrated. It is very organic. It is not artificial the way many of our universities are laid out today. And this, mind you, is a 10th century. It is not even the 21st century. And the kind of people in Andalusia, I just want to show you, these are just the headgears. Yeah, in Andalusia. The headgears alone tell us how diversified this place is, right? You go to Malaysia, you probably find a number of kupiah, a number of songkok with different colors, but never in this kind of merit of sort of creativity as far as headgears is concerned. All right, the hijab, for example. I mean, some people comes to me and say, Zul, why are your ladies are all wearing a hijab like a nun? They have different kind of hijabs, and meaning to say the creativity that they've got and the diversity that they've tolerated tells us about what this place is all about, and that translates into a transmission of knowledge. Right? They play games that doesn't belong to them, but is a highly intellectual game, a strategic game. Not only the men plays it, but also the women plays it. Right? Not only they create their own pieces of ivory, and this is one of the most prized chess pieces that is created in Andalusia in the 11th century. I'm trying to tell you, basically, when you talk about Islam, it is not the Islam that we know now that is very inward looking, but it is Islam that is outward looking with a level of confidence that they can confront and they can actually deal with whatever is different from them. They don't run into their shell and say, we are Muslim and therefore we don't want to talk to you, kind of a thing. They are really, really well ready to engage. And that is where, quote unquote, in my sense, a world-class university as far as the thinking is concerned. Of course, we don't have to go very far. When we look at Baitul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, it is a combination of a library, an academy, a translation bureau, an astronomical observatory, all in one. If I do just to think about translation bureau, I think half of our university has got a press that is neither here nor there. And how do you expect them to propagate literature if your press is not world-class in that sense? And this is something that I think we need to think about, because world-class talks about communication of knowledge. And if the communication of knowledge is not good, then we are just losing the game. Yeah, and there's two personalities. I think you know them. I will come to Ibn Shatir a little bit later. But these are the people who actually make the difference as far as the Baitul Hikmah is concerned. That transform is there. The Arabs that transform Western civilization. In fact, we create that civilization from our own civilization, given the knowledge that has been, used and disseminated all over. I don't have to talk about this in healthcare, the community. I just want to underline the word community. It is not a healthcare in a private sense, but healthcare for the public sense. The first madrasa that was mentioned to you, and it is also part of your literature, the Panto, I think the Arkaria University in Fes, right? Built in 859, according to UNESCO. This is the first operating university since then, right? None other but this one. And this is also created by a female, Fatima Alfred. So people tell me why Islam do not entertain education for women. I say you go and fly kite, because this, what we see now, the first university in the world is created by women. And if they use Waqaf as a foundation, And as I read the literature, she fasted until the university is completed. She go on fasting every day until the university is completed, then she breaks a fast. I mean, this is the kind of story that we need to revisit and see how real are we in trying to create a world-class university of our own. Yeah? And let me quote the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam: wealth is not due to plenty of money, what Islam is saying, but wealth is about the wealth of the self. The moment the self is wealthy, and I think we have got more things to do than just when the physical self is wealthy, as far as that's concerned. This is another very, very big example that we can give. At that particular time, we learned about the world is the center of the universe. The sun's operated. This comes from people like Ptolemy and so on and so forth. But later on, it is changed into the heliocentric theory. And a few of us know that the one who starts this discussion is Ibn Shatir. Ibn Shatir, 200 years before Copernicus announced the heliocentric theory, he has already wrote about it. He has already drawn a diagram. And some people said that piece of literature that Ibn Shatir wrote was then in the Vatican Library. Copernicus then was a monk, was a priest in the Vatican Library, and he wrote something which is equivalent to Ibn Shatir.
Tan Sri, unmute, please. Unmute, please, Tan Sri. Tan Sri, unmute. Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Proceed.
Anyway, he will be sort of declared a heretic because he has moved into one of the main pillars of Christian theology that talks about sun revolving around Earth. I want to give the example to show how revolutionary the Muslim scholars at that time, that we dare to contest things which is not right, and write a book about it, and other people will borrow it and make it real as far as knowledge is concerned. Okay, so let's forget about that. I think in the 13th centuries, when Andalusia collapsed for reason not knowledge, for reason of something else, yeah, greed mainly, then the Western tradition comes in, right? So the first medieval university came in, and it was then announced at the University of Bologna. And these are some of the characteristics. I just want to mention the last point. There are more than 1,500 80 universities that was established then, yeah, and the word universitas was taken it, and it was actually based on the guilds that replaces the monasteries, that replaces the madrasa. Now, what does the word universitas mean? Universitas means the number of principles that they have created. But before that, I just want to show what is the environment then, yeah, and this is one of the drawing that was drawn by I forgot the artist, but you look at this. When you look at this the fresco, these are basically the scholars at that time in the Academy of Athens. And what is interesting, there is no non-European there. All of them are European. And this is at the verge when they want to create this medieval university that I talked to you about, except for this guy here. Yeah, this is supposedly to be Pythagoras. This is supposedly to be Avicenna or Ibn Rushd, right? Now, why is Ibn Rushd here when the rest are all non-Europeans? He is here because he is a European. He is known as Avicenna, not Ibn Rushd. That's the other thing that I want you to remember. If you want to go into the fold of modern society, you must, Western society, you must behave Western. And hence the structure, and hence the name, and hence the habit, and hence everything else that you do as far as the university is concerned must appear Western, otherwise you will not be accepted. I've moved quite a lot. When I was the president of International Association University, we worked with 700 universities, and what I'm saying to you is real. If you go in as a Muslim, if you go in as a Easterner, you have hard time to get them to convince that you are real. Yeah. So there is this game that they are playing. In other words, to create a world-class university, India said you need to be westernized whether we like it or not. In other words, you need to take some of the values in and pretend that is the values that we are also promoting at the same time. That's the second lesson that we need to learn. Yeah. So the University of Bologna, then they claim this to be the first university in the world, but then UNESCO stepped in and said, no, you are the first in Western university because Al-Karajan is the first university given in that context. But they are the first university in the sense that they use the word universitas as university. There are 4 elements to this university, and they now copyright the name of universitas, meaning to say that if you want to call yourself a university at that particular time in the 11th century, you must be, as one of the conditions, the trustee of the European humanist tradition. And this is still there on the clause called the Magnitata Universitatem sort of principle, that a university, as far as they are concerned, must be the trustee of the European humanist tradition. And this is where I mentioned earlier, when you talk about university, in this context, it is about European centricity. It's about westernization. And if you look at your university today, whether you call it Islamic or not, I can see there's so many the mention of the European centricity in the university. All right? And I think this is something, again, that we need to be very, very clear. When you talk about university, what is it we are talking about? Are we subscribing to the Magnitata Universitatem principle, or are we able to now deviate and move and recreate this university that we are going to talk about in the next 2 days? Yeah. So these are very key things. I've been challenging them. I say, look, if you want us to be a part of you need to change this. You must talk about not only European, you must talk about global, you must talk about internationalization. And I think they are trying to change it after 900 years. I don't know whether they will be successful or otherwise. Okay. So this is how they organize themselves. The clergy will be there and everybody else will sit, and they know there's a person who give a lecture and so on and so forth. And let me just say, if there's the Jeju-centric literature, all right, and then it goes to the Renaissance, okay? And the Renaissance take the claim and they say Copernicus is the one who does it, but in actual fact, it is our brother Ibn Shatul who writes it. So when we contest this literature, they say, oh, this is a similar thinking between two scientists. It could be similar within maybe a decade, but it cannot be similar within 200 years or 2,000 years. Right? Somebody must have picked this from somebody else. But I'm saying you that basically some of the knowledge that we have created have been taken by them. And there's a good book called The Theft of History, written by Professor Jack Goody, who is an emeritus professor of sociology in Cambridge. He passed away about 3 years ago. But his book tells us that many of the literature from the Muslim world are taken by with the Western civilization, and they don't even footnote it. Yeah, for us, as each time we borrow something from them, they say put a reference. But for them, when they took things from us, they don't even footnote it, let alone reference it. That is the other idea that I think you need to also recognize when you want to create an Islamic university. Let's move on. From the Islamic university, now we go into this modern and very recently a global university. I think this is the point that we need to contest, because we are now in the midst of this. All our universities, whether we are like it or not, are going to be challenged by this so-called modern global university. And how Islamic can we be depends on how much do we understand what is this global university is all about moving forward in the 18th century. 18th century talks about the Renaissance, right? And I want you just to draw your attention that is so-called the Dark Ages between the 8th century and for more than 100 years or so, or 1,000 years or so, sorry, which is called the Dark Ages, but it's actually the Dark Ages of the Europeans. It's not the Dark Ages of the Muslims. The Muslims go on inventing, go on making things, right? And so are the Indians and the Chinese civilization, which is a longer civilization than that. But the moment they are able to control the situation and they begin, like I say, monopolize this, copyrighted it, and make it, this is ours and it's not yours, then I think this whole thing becomes already a farce. And therefore, they take on with all this idea of enlightenment and so on and so forth, which is a little bit of history that we need to know, and they discount everything else, this is not theirs, which does not belong to their civilization, their literature, or their worldview as such. Right? So if I were to summarize this, we start off with the notion of university of scholars, a community of scholars. These are the Greeks and the Romans that goes and preach at public places, and this is why the word discourse and so on and so forth coming in. Then we have indigenous models that people take it, and this includes the indigenous model of different countries, different places. And then the word universitas comes in, and then the universitas give us it to another model, which I call the modern university, which is built on the Industrial Revolution sort of model. And for the university, from that on, becomes almost an assembly line university. And this is what I meant today. When you go to our university is no more than a factory, all right, that produces people at the end of the day for the purpose of industry and for the purpose of economic well-being, and that's it. The rest is secondary, and hence we have now what we call the education factory. And this is why Prof. Kamal, the one that the ministry asked us to rewrite, we are going to rewrite this. We don't want to move into the factory model anymore. We want to move into a community model. So the modern university, in a nutshell, is about a factory. It's about producing human capital. It's about producing economic well-being. The human beings themselves are left alone, and they are not being attended to the way it was attended during the Islamic centers and centers of learning. To cut the story short, there is a video that I want to recommend. It is called The Ivory Tower, that talks about the collapse of the modern universities. And this is produced by Andrew Rossi, by CNN, and also Columbia University, Professor Kamal punya alma mater. Yeah? And the conclusion to this is that they are talking about the university embracing a business model that usually promotes expansion over quality learning. If this is the judgment of this modern university, what world-class university are we talking about? When quality of learning is superseded by economics, well-being, and expansion of just physical things and physical good. That is the point for us to think about. And as you can see, the visual for this ivory tower, this probably is a rector, yeah, having to support millions and millions of dollars because the university are getting into debt. And you can see this. In the video, it makes a comparison. Price increases since 1978 to the year 2010, right? They compare it to food, healthcare, and college. Yeah, the inflation for food is about just 200%, for healthcare about 600%, and for education is 1,120%. And nobody is able to account for it. Why education gone up so much until and unless we accept this proposition by Andrew Rossi that this is a business concern. It is not an education anymore. It is a business concern. It's about commoditizing knowledge. It's about selling knowledge. It is about trading knowledge. It's about all this idea of ranking and so on and so forth. That is where we are now. And if you have to juxtapose that with what an Islamic university is all about, you will find a world of difference between these two contexts that we need to reckon with. Yeah? These are some of the quotes of the interview, just in case you have no time or just in case the video is no longer there. Yeah? Christensen, I think you know, he is a Harvard guy who wrote about the book, The Inventor's Dilemma. And he talked about Harvard is the source of DNA. I talk Harvard because everybody wants to refer to Harvard, an institution in America. When passed down to everybody else, is creating a race. Tension that develops within newer university, a mission to educate young people, and the competition for prestige. Yeah, there's the word that's now the world class that comes from that, and to build out the rivals. In other words, there's no cooperation, there's no working together. I need to make sure that my rival vanquish because I want to have the prestige and I want to remain on top. Okay? More programs, more facilities at a faster rate than the competitors. So we produce any products that we can sell, right, and become the model. And in this case, it talks about the residential system, providing everything into swimming pools and parties, and it's for people to be attracted to your university, not so much to study, but much more for the university to make money out of you. And they could be successful for centuries, but now things are changing. Scale and costs are enormous. Products are so expensive that people cannot pay for it and have to go into debt, and that's just viable anymore. So you can see the structure of the university now is beginning to change. The so-called model that was pristine at one time has taken different dimension, and I can quote a number more. This is a very interesting one, because when I say people are not going there to study, and these are the statistics that this Richard Arum talked about. Yeah, it talks about 36% of the kids, at least in the American system, study less than 5 hours. Not a single class where they wrote more than 20 pages of distraction and no one holding their hand. All right, I still remember the book by Harry Lewis that talks about excellence without soul. 68% of the students at public universities fail to graduate in 4 years as of 2014, sorry. And 44% fail to graduate in 6 years. So much for quality education, if we were to talk about this quotation from Arum. And last but not least, a small quotation by another person who is quite an authority of this. He said, American education is driven by the pursuit of prestige, back to the question of reputation, world class, leading to a brand, and then they charge more. So the whole idea of world-class university is about business, is about making money, is about reputation. It is not about education per se. If it is, it's probably the third or the fourth priority. It's not the first priority, the way we want to understand it as far as Islam is concerned. So here you are. Students are beginning to protest. This is, I think, one of the university that talk. University is a factory, strike, and occupy. This is in the Occupy movement. Yeah, they talk about free thinking, not free thinking, not free thinking. Right? This university now is raising their fees, and we've got books like The Knowledge Factory. We have books like Lowering Higher Education, and these are books that talks about how university needs to be corporatized so that they can generate more income for their own self. Right, and last but not least, that video also talks about this Cooper Union University that is actually a kind of a free university that talks about how they can finance people who are not in the category to support their studies. Yeah, and one of the students, when they occupy the president's office, talks about this. We need to realize this moment in the country with $1 trillion of student debts, with all models of higher education as the business, is failing. Right? And therefore, I would like to take this word when you talk about private Islamic university. I want you to be very, very clear what private means to you. Education to me is a public good. In other words, you should not charge them, or at least you should charge them exceedingly, because it is a right for everybody, rather than paying through your nose as far as private institutions concerned, particularly in Malaysia. And I'm beginning to worry now. When we talk international students, we talk about their fees 3 times, 4 times, and even 5 times more compared to local students. For IIUM, this is not acceptable, because if you want to develop the Ummah, there's no boundaries. Whether you come from Syria, Yemen, or whatever it is, the knowledge that we're giving is for knowledge of the Ummah. So there shouldn't be differentiation, or at least stark differentiation. And this is, I think, the thing that we are fighting at the moment in time. So the future evolution of university, now that we come to this sort of thing, what we are talking about education for sustainable development. Why sustainable development? The reason is very simple, because the world is no longer equitable. Yeah, especially compared to the developed and the developing country, Muslim country at large, be it economy, be it ecology, be it the social structure, including education, and be it even the geopolitics. They are no longer equitable. And only education can bring it back, because education is meant to be, quote unquote, a leveler of society. If you don't have that right, then I think we will remain in this mold, and we will be the losing counterpart at the end of the day. I just want to redraw this a little bit. There's a national university in between, but we have no time to talk about it. But let's just proceed. So that's why I am quite gung-ho about this whole idea of sustainable development. Sustainable development in the shell talk about equitability. There are 5 dimensions they need to talk about. One is about dignity. In other words, we want to use education to end poverty, to fight inequality. We think we are doing that until the last or Black Lives Matters come into picture, we know that university in the West are also not about dignity because they segregate the minority studies. It talks about equitable prosperity. How do you share the knowledge we've got? How do you share what you call the economics or whatever it is? It is about sharing. It is making people together in a kind of a transformative way. We talk about justice, again, another value that is very close to our heart as Muslim. How do you behave as, and in a way that justice is dispensed through education at the same time? We talk about partnership, not competition, not ranking. How can we collaborate? And alhamdulillah, today I hope is a mission for us to collaborate together. Yeah, we talk about the place we stay, the abode, which is the world itself, which is the planet. Yeah, which is part of creation, which is part of knowledge. When we talk about sustainability, we learn about what nature inspires us, and a many lesson. There's a whole discipline called biomimicry now, that we look at nature as a solution to our future problems. But if you destroy nature, then we will lose the inspiration. Neither are we doing what you're supposed to do in terms of looking after God's creation. And last but not least, it's about people-centric. It is not about a factory, it is not about anything else, but it is people, and the people that we know in terms of the Muslim sort of understanding of the holistic whole, not just the hand in the context of what you call human capital, but the whole human being, spirituality and all. So that is what SDG is all about. Some people rejected it because they think it is not Islamic, but I think that we can Islamize it. In IIUM, we are bringing Maqasid Ashariyah, we are bringing the word Rahmatan lil Alamin into it to make sure that the values of Islam stay within this framework of sustainable development. Okay, let me quickly go to about what are we addressing now. When we talk about sustainable development, goal number 4 talks about quality education, which means to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education and promote lifelong opportunities for all. That to me is important because everybody must have accessibility to education, quality education at that. Yeah, and for that they've got a framework which is called Education 2030. Barely 10 years from now, that we want to move into this equitable, equality education for all, no matter where, Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere, or whatever it is. And in fact, for the last 2 years, we have been involved, IIUM has been involved with UNESCO in trying to develop what we call the new education moving forward beyond 2019. We didn't know the COVID will hit, but this workshop has been going for the last 2 years. There are reports already. Dr. Jamil, if you want this, I can give you the report. Maybe there's a place that you can start discussing what works and what do not work as far as the Muslim is concerned. But this whole exercise tells us, what world do we want? In other words, for the first time, we are able as Muslims to dictate and say, this is the world that we want. We are no longer interested in the world that you invented for us. It doesn't work anymore. All right? And why it doesn't work anymore? COVID tells us there's so many things that is not working as far as education is concerned. And nobody can negate that because it is very, very clear. Statistics tells us like 1.3 billion people are out of school just because of this a pandemic, that we are not prepared. If the world-class university is so world-class, then the countries like United States and UK should have solved that problem yesterday, because they've got all the brains that they need to do this. Not only vaccine, but they can also control behaviors of the people. But it is not the case. Yeah, it is not the case. And we ask ourselves, what can we learn from this? COVID, what can we learn? What is it that God wants us to be mindful about when we talk about education in the context of COVID? Very clearly, you find that many of the countries within our ambit are the ones that are suffering. In Asia, in many of these countries that actually do not prepare themselves for what the COVID is all about. One thing that is coming very strongly before anything else is question of mental health. In other words, we are not even training our students to be mentally resilient, mentally ready. Being a Muslim as such, we are still at a level of, trying to commit suicide and so on and so forth. And that, I think, is a very telling thing for us. Yeah, if in university are not able to maintain the sanity of the student, then there is something fundamentally wrong in terms of education and university. University may be good, but the suicide rate is high, then I think that it does not tell very much about the university is concerned, right? Now, here again, half of the population is pushed into poverty, and again, you can see this from East Asia, the IIIT East Asia. You can talk about South Asia. You can talk about the Middle East. You can talk about Central Asia. This is where all the Muslim states. If you put this together, then you find that we are not in a good position to move forward. Until and unless we flatten the curve. We flatten the education curve, to me, meaning that everybody must be treated equitably. Opportunity must be present equitably. It doesn't matter whether East or the West, and that is the right of everybody, including the Muslims. And that is not going to be solved by just online education alone, because when online education needs to fit into other infrastructures, connectivity, devices, the kind of living environment. We see this in Malaysia. I mean, I'm ashamed to admit, but let's call a spade a spade. When we want to do online education, some of our students in Sabah and Sarawak have to climb trees to get connectivity. Malaysia is supposed to be a middle income country, one of the prosperous Muslim countries, but students in the rural area, Muslim students particularly, have to climb trees to get connectivity. What is it all about? So we cannot even talk about world class if these opportunities are not given to them. We are still talking about segmentation rather than the total well-being, right? I'm going to end very soon, Aslam, don't worry. So United Nations has thought about this earlier. 10 years ago, when we talk about sustainability with the United Nations University, we are asking ourselves, can the structure of modern university be sustainable? The question is no. It is at already this level. So when you use the word sustainable private education, the modern structure is not going to support it. You need to move into a different structure. And this is where the context becomes important. This is where history becomes important. This is where the big picture becomes important, the one I've been trying to present to you. Right? Now, they created another, what they call the regional centers of expertise on education for sustainable development. And that is one of them. They talk about partnership. You are not competing with one another. We talk about people working together. We need to reorient sustainable development, means focusing on the 5 things that I talked to you about: dignity, prosperity, justice, partnership, planet, and people. Not what the factory wants, not what the politician wants, and not what a few people who can pay wants. We want to talk about the whole gamut of people who will benefit from this. Yeah? We want to talk about really access to quality education. Quality in the sense that it is relevant to the world today. It's not about quality that is relevant to yesterday. All right? And the discussion we still have now is about yesterday rather than the future. Yeah? And it's within the context. In this case, the regional context, the national context, and the local context. What is it that we need to solve the problem of today in real time? And not 20 years, 30 years from now, because I think there is enough knowledge, but there is not enough political will to do this. So that is the whole idea. And Alhamdulillah, there's only about 179 of these centers that have been recognized by United Nations since 2005. And we've got ours last year. Yeah, we have given the status of the regional centers called the Greater Gombak. And what it means to us is this. The Greater Gombak, we have got partners. We have got now 20 partners around the world, NGOs, local communities that provide a platform for transformation. In other words, you don't need to belong to a school per se. When there is no school in your place, you can still do learning in a transformative way. We do not depend on infrastructure per such, but this is the challenge that we need to move ahead, because there are people are everywhere. And they want to reach them as much as possible. And it embraces not only the things that we learn in the classroom, it talks about the environment, it talks about the values of social culture, and of course, the economic. The economic in the context of economics. Eco means the environment needs to take place before just economy, the way we understand. This is something that we have done, and I would like to emphasize also, as much as what ASLAM is saying just now, we don't want to be another bureaucracy. We don't want to be part of the government institution that talks about rules that is not relevant to us. Yeah. So the question of human resource management, we need to talk about autonomy. How do you autonomy? And I think this case, I think UNIDA is a good example. I saw Brother Hamid there. He probably can help us. The kind of leadership as a team, not as an individual, a collective team, the Mashwara kind of thing becomes important in running this kind of a thing with a board that is also sympathetic to it. Right now, the board comes in. The board is the one that, to my mind, enforces the corporate culture, because half of them come from business sectors and they use the corporate culture to actually stifle the university. And I think this is not something that I would go for. All right. So let me just very quickly recount what we have done in the last 2 or 3 years. Yeah, we took the tagline "Leading the Way" coming from the song. I'm sure you all still remember the song. Okay? Leading the way, we want to be the first in this particular case. That first will tell us whether we are world class or not. In other words, we write our own rules, we demonstrate that we can work, and we demonstrate the outcome. And the outcome in this particular case, last year, we were given the status of Sustainability Institution of the Year for the whole world. Right? And Islamic University taken that, and this comes from UNEP. It is not just any commercial institution. And this year, we were given the status of UNESCO Chair Studies for the Future. The first time, I think, in Malaysia that we have got this chair, and I'm sure also in other parts of the world. And this gives us an opportunity to recreate the future. Right? We have got projects of IIUM 2040. We have got project of IIUM 2077. All these, I think, will allow us now to recreate the future as we have built it for this particular workshop. Right? Just to show you some of the evidence. Yeah, and the Greater Gombak, for those of you who are used to the Gombak campus is here, but we have also Kuantan, we have also Pago. So your Gombak now is defined in a very big area that we work together with all the people within this area, right? And last year we just test again what are the things that we do, whether it's relevant or not. Alhamdulillah, we are recognized in 8 categories. Yeah, 2 outstanding sort of projects, 3 honorable mention, and 3 others acknowledged flagship. And this, alhamdulillah, gives us a kind of a confidence that we think we are moving in the right direction in trying to restructure education moving forward for the Islamic world as such. And alhamdulillah, also just 2 weeks ago, we are given another recognition that is International Islamic University, highly commendable for another program that we have created. This is just a try and test program for what they call the next generation of learning and skills. And I will just briefly go to you before I stop. And this is what we call the high flex, transforming learning with soul. The word soul there is purposely done so that it is seen that we are also moving into a spiritual dimension, not just a physical dimension. Yeah? It is a multiple stakeholders, in other words, not just us. The community comes also contribute as to what this is all about. There are a group of volunteers. We are trying to follow what our brother in Bontor is trying to do. People who are volunteering, even they got excess workload, they still want to help in the relevant knowledge and the skills they've got, so that we don't have to retrain them. Even with the absence of monetary or material reward. We work the wakaf thing. You donate your time, you donate your knowledge. We are not going to pay you a single cent, because we think this is a kind of sacrifice that we need to do for it. Yeah? But in a sense, these are the 4 things that we look at. Transdisciplinarity and integrated. Remember when we go to Andalusia, when we look at the kind of people that they do, there's no exam per se. The exam is throughout spread. It is formative and summative. So at the end of the day, we also trail down the behavior, not just the knowledge, right? And we also teach them how to do research, how to deal with data, how to actually make sound argument rather than being emotional about it. It is community engaged. It is action and also solution oriented. Yeah. So I think I was okay. Last time is basically this, and all this is possible because we sat down to look at what sort of academic framework we want to do. Right? For the last 2 years, we've created what they call the Sejahtera Academic Framework, humanizing education for Rahmatan Lil Alamin post-COVID 2019. Yeah. And this is in a nutshell, it is a framework that is both old and new. In other words, what works for IIUM, we retain. What does not work, we then sound out, or rather try to revisit and refurbished. Yeah? It is all in the sense that the core values and the mission and the vision of the university continue to be the bedrock. It is new in that it weaves together the current and the future major agenda while demanding each and every one of us at both individual and organizational level to reflect on our role and responsibility to move the university into the future. So this was launched, I think, it was just 2 months ago by our constitutional head, which happens to be the Queen of Malaysia. So I think I've taken so much of my time. Let's just be stopped there. I thank you very much for your kind attention, and also beg for forgiveness if I've said the wrong thing or if I've incited somebody in the wrong way. But inshallah, I think this is something that I hope will benefit us in one way or another. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. If there's any question, I'll try and answer them the best I could.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much, Tan Sri. I think, as usual, your sessions are always very, very effective. You have managed to give a kind of a brief history of the university as an institution. Many things that I'm sure many of us would have found out for the first time. You come to the current dilemma that we are facing, that is the modern university has become a commercial entity, or commercial aspects have become a very big concern, and sometimes we tend to overlook the other maybe even fundamental goals of what university is supposed to be. I mean, just a little point, I think as far as questions are concerned, Tan Sri, we have so many questions already in the chat, and what I think we will do is maybe we pass these questions to you, and if you could answer them, we will make them available for everyone else, because there's just too many, and if I was to choose one or two, I'm sure the others would be very unhappy. So we will collect this, and then we will send to you, and then maybe you can give your answer, and then we will make it available to everyone else.
I will do that. Thank you.
And certainly, I think, even if I remember correctly, the last time we organized the program with you, we owe you a session. I think we were supposed to give you a second session.
For the alumni.
Not the alumni. I think it was a IIIT program.
IIIT program.
And we never got around to that because of the various reasons. But certainly we would like to get back to this. There's a lot of interesting issues. And I think you have set the tone for the sessions to come, because the other sessions are now going to talk not only about the financial side, but all the other aspects of what a university is supposed to be.